order, y'all.
Yeah, it's 10 o'clock. Can we go ahead and get started? Because I know we got a bunch of busy people around the table that's got a lot of things to do today in terms of making America great again. So would you call the roll?
Albritton.
Present.
Ballant.
Present.
Giddings.
Here.
Moore.
Here.
Swazer.
Here.
Walker. D. Waterman. P. Waterman.
Present.
White.
Present.
So we have a quorum.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Is there anyone from the public that would like to speak?
I don't have anything.
Okay. I think we're going to move Jan's resolution up to the top. If there's no objections, so that she can be on with her day. Well, it really is a pleasure and an honor. I'm certain that everyone would agree for us to read a resolution into our minutes that will be there forever about a person that exempts everything that a trustee should be. I think that Jan, of course, could serve as a shining example for any pension board in this nation and come out smelling like roses. So could we first of all read the resolution, Deborah?
Resolution of appreciation for Janice Gaffney. Whereas Janice Gaffney has faithfully served as an employee of the City of Pontiac, as an employee trustee of the General Employees Retirement System from April 1998 through March 2003, and as a member trustee from October 2012 through June 2019. And whereas Janice Gaffney began her career with the City of Pontiac in 1977 as a project analyst, and whereas Janice Gaffney's dedication and hard work allowed her to quickly climb the ranks in her department, serving as purchasing supervisor and finally as purchasing agent for the city. And whereas Janice Gaffney, having conscientiously served the citizens of the City of Pontiac for nearly 26 years, retired in 2005, and whereas Janice Gaffney has given generously of her time and talent and demonstrated her commitment to serving others, as is evident through her extensive volunteering for the retirement system, as well as other organizations, including the Clarkston Independent District Library and the CPREA Retiree Association. And whereas Janice Gaffney has displayed an understanding of the fiduciary responsibilities a trustee must have to serve the members and beneficiaries of the retirement system. And whereas Janice Gaffney carried out her fiduciary responsibilities with a sense of dedication, scholarship, and integrity on the behalf of the board and the members of the retirement system. And whereas Janice Gaffney fostered collaboration and goodwill among all interested parties of the retirement system, including trustees, city and system staff, and retirees, and encouraged open and honest dialogue with diplomacy, kindness, and respect. And whereas Janice Gaffney has shown leadership and great vision while tirelessly serving as the chair of the Personnel and Administration Committee and in drafting the system's original ethics policy. And whereas Janice Gaffney treated all of the retirement system's trustees, member staff, service providers, and all others concerned in an even-handed manner that evidenced a recognition that each had a unique and significant role in the successful management of the system. And whereas Janice Gaffney's compassionate, genuine, and good-natured personality, high ethical standards, and deep commitment to excellence is to be admired and emulated. And whereas Janice Gaffney has tended to the needs of the members of this system as passionately as she has cared for her own family. Because for her we are looking out for their best interests and speaking on their behalf now, Therefore, be it resolved that the Board of Trustees, on behalf of itself and all concerned, hereby expresses its gratitude and appreciation to Janice Gaffney for her years of commitment and service as an employee of the City of Pontiac and as a trustee of the retirement system. And be it further resolved, Janice Gaffney shall be forever remembered for the numerous and exceptional contributions she has made to the retirement system and her community. And be it further resolved that the Board of Trustees does hereby tender to Janice Gaffney both its appreciation for her many labors and many thanks for a job well done, and wishes for her all the best in her future personal and professional endeavors. And be it further resolved that the Board of Trustees recognizes Janice Gaffney's husband, Tom Saunders, and expresses its thanks to him for the support he has provided his wife, which allowed her to do this work, and for his own benevolence and concerned outreach to ensure his fellow retiree continue to receive its benefit. And be it further resolved that the Board of Trustees, on behalf of all the aforementioned parties, say thank you, Jan, for the years of service on behalf of the retirement system and its members.
You're here.
Is there a mover?
Move. Support.
Okay, it's been moved and support. I know it's going to be difficult for Jan because she's more of a behind the scenes person. But we're going to ask Jan if she would just stand for a moment.
Y'all are making me cry.
Vice Chair Albright will present her with her plaque.
All right. Thank you for taking over the meeting there, Deborah. I appreciate that. I was going to have Jan, can you come to the end of the table over here?
Why can't she get this in?
And we'd ask that the vice chair present the resolution, and that any trustee that would, after that, you'd want to make any comments, feel free to do so.
I'm not going to be able to say much because I am all teary here, but it has been a pleasure to serve with all of you on this board and with all of the trustees that I've served with through the years. Some of you have been city employees for years. And thanks for recognizing my husband too. He's going to love that part. But this was a difficult decision to make because, as any of you who have known me at all, when I make a commitment, I take it very seriously, and I always took this commitment seriously, but it was time to do something else. So thank you again for serving with me and for appreciating my service. That means the world to me. Thank you.
Would anybody like to add anything?
Well, Mr. Chair, if I would, I'd just like to thank you, Jan, for the many years of service. You know, I worked with you with the city of Pontiac. I know your ethics and how you go about doing things, and you have made this retirement board a better place. Thank you so much.
Go ahead, Ben.
Okay, and I'd like to say thank you. I worked with the city, and it was great having you here when I joined the retirement system. As a trustee, it was nice seeing you when I was a citizen coming, but it was helpful for the things that you showed me how to do. And I thank you for taking the time to honor us both as workers and as retirees. Thank you.
Hearing none of that, I'd just like to.
Walter, give me a
Go ahead,
moment.
Sheldon.
It's been a pleasure, Jan. I just hate the fact that the reason I'm here to be, I understand you feel the pain, I understand what you're going through. God is still in the blessing business. And you're gonna be okay.
I know that. I do know that.
And thank you for all that you have done for the board. Enjoy, take the time, enjoy your family, enjoy your retirement.
I like to say, as a trustee and a retiree, I appreciate your service to the retirement system. It's been a pleasure to work for you, and you will surely be missed by this board.
I'll miss forward too.
I just like to make a comment or two too. Jan, wish the best for you in your retirement. It's kind of hard to believe that you're retiring, officially retiring. But of course, I understand the circumstance, and I know how difficult it is. And I think that you are an example that I can follow, because at some point we'll all have to transition. And I just hope that I have the courage and whatever it takes at that time to be able to do what you've done. I know how hard it is. I know how you love this city, and I know how you enjoy what you're doing. The thing that, of course, that I remember, that I'll always remember the most about you, in addition to your willingness to give of yourself, is the word ethics. You exemplify ethics, and of course that's you set an example that we and anyone following us that could definitely follow. But of course, we don't want to make this seem like it's a funeral, because we want that's what it seems like. And Lord knows we don't want this to seem like that. So we want to kind of end with a positive. We want to wish you an opportunity, of course, to have all your time to do as you feel free to do. And we want you to also tell your other half, because you of course are the better half, that we wish the same for him.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Deborah.
Mr. Moore, there is someone from the public who would like to speak.
Pardon me?
There's someone from the public who would like to speak and address you.
Feel free.
To Jan, I just wanted to say it has been a pleasure knowing you all through the years, and I'm really gonna miss you. I felt confident in your handling of the birds and committees and secret and all of that, and I trusted you. And I don't give that trust very easily. But I feel very comfortable with the decisions made.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
If I may, Mr.
Go
Moore.
ahead.
Just as a service provider, as an attorney that has worked with you for many years, it has been my pleasure. Everything that everyone has said around the table is true times 100. You are very ethical. You're a great trustee to work with, and I will miss you. I'm glad we're friends on Facebook, so we can keep up.
Okay. Is anything else that anyone would like to say at this point? Hearing none, I'm going to ask Vice Chair Albritton if he would then chair this meeting, and
we have to vote on the resolution.
Accept that responsibility?
Yes, but before we move on, do we need to vote on the resolution for Jan?
Yep.
Support. All in favor of it? Aye. Resolution has been passed. All right. We're gonna just call.
Of course, Sheldon, you don't have Jan there to coach you like I did, but.
Well, I got Patrice on my left here, so I think I'll be okay.
Don't mess it up.
I believe he was the right guy for Patrice. moving right along. We're just gonna stay with the agenda and we're gonna go as it flows right here. The resolution for the actuary. Is there any language behind that, Deborah?
I guess it's a point of order because I do have a question. Mr. Newsom is here, but I don't know if you all have questions for him or if he intended to ask questions or answer questions. No, okay.
If there are questions, I'm willing. Okay, well, he's not the one that's supposed to be.
Oh. No, that's why I was asking the question.
So we should have the person that was supposed to be presenting this. Why is she not here? Again.
I don't have an answer. We reached out
Okay,
to.
let's table it and move it on.
I'd like to know though,
You need a motion to table it?
because is anyone able to tell us, because the real issue is, I mean, is this still on the table or what's going on with this? Because this is, how long has this been here?
Going on the third month.
I mean, how long are we going to carry this on?
My thing would be, Mr. Chair and Mr. Vice Chair, is to have a letter sent to the executive office stating what is going to be done about this issue. If it's not, this is a moot issue, and let us move on.
Okay.
Executive
That sounds like a good idea, because at this point we just kind of we just carrying this and we don't have any information or any direction. So I think that the suggestion that Trustee Waterman made would be a good one, so that we can at least formally ask for something in writing to respond to us what's going on here.
Do we need a move and support on that? You work. Okay.
I move.
And I support.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed?
May I ask a question?
Sure.
I just wanted to confirm, the notice is going to executive office that they either respond in writing or this matter will be removed from our agenda.
Exactly. All right, moving right along. Any agenda
The
changes?
next meeting
Yes,
is going to be in a month,
All right.
so before the next agenda goes out.
The first agenda item, there's a handout in there's a set of minutes in your handouts. We made a correction at the March meeting. The correction that we made was to the January meeting minutes, but this minutes reflect what was made to the February minutes. We need to make that correction to the March minutes. In your handouts, there's an accounts payable correction where for Northern Trust the index funds, I picked up a past due balance and it should just be the amount that's in red.
So is the total still the same?
No, the total is the amount that's in red.
No, but the total.
Total.
No, the total would change as well.
Okay, so what is the new total then?
I'm sorry, I don't have a calculator with me.
Okay.
You can use my phone if you want. I carry my calculator everywhere now.
So they came up with the total. What was the total?
I'm getting it in a moment.
So is your calculator tied into your billing system?
I'm old school on that. I got to write it down.
251-191-79. Thank you.
You're welcome.
There is a handout in your agenda from Tech Pro CTS. It's a business launch, small firm in downtown Pontiac. Is having a business launch party Friday night, and that is being added to the communication section of the agenda. In the electronic agendas that you received, item A was a request for an appeal for the disability member. That has actually been moved to new business because the board historically has approved the appeal. So that is actually a resolution under new business now. We need to add a resolution. There's a resolution to reschedule the annual meeting. We will also need to potentially reschedule the regular and the finance committee meetings, and we can discuss that under new business. In your handouts, there's a long page, and this is the interest calculation for TerraCap. The one in your agenda is pretty small. I thought that one might be helpful when the consultant discusses the TerraCap interest. And then lastly in your agenda, there's a client list from MMRO. They are the company that staff is recommending that we select as medical director. The finance committee requested the Michigan public plans that they represent. So that is in your handouts as well. And that's all I have for agenda changes, Mr. Vice Chair.
So we need to take a vote on those agenda changes.
Generally, I think this board, you put the changes into the consent agenda or into the agenda, and then you approve the agenda as corrected.
Okay.
That's what it was.
All in favor?
Aye.
So, next on the agenda is it for the consultant. That they have.
No, the consent agenda, I think.
The consent agenda.
I believe that was already.
We just did that.
We just
before.
We can do it again.
You voted to approve the consent
All
agenda.
right, we approved the consent agenda there?
Right, with all the changes.
I thought that was for the agenda changes.
Pardon me?
I thought that was for the agenda changes.
That was to add the changes to the consent agenda and then approve the consent agenda as amended.
All right.
Okay?
Okay, Daniel.
So we'll start off with preliminary performance, and then I'll hit the cap post trade analysis of the TerraCap. So first off, we have the preliminary performance for the quarter ending. Oh, nothing. Oh, what's that? Oh, from yesterday. We have it. I'm gonna pass this back down. All right. So for the quarter ending June 30th, 2019, look at the top line, second column in, the fund was up 3.4%, gross of fees, slightly ahead of the shadow index of 3.3%. That's how we gauge our active management performance. Year to date, the fund is up 13%. As it plays out, the market has done pretty much what we talked about earlier in the year. We felt that the fourth quarter of this time was awful in terms of our fiscal year. It was more of a market correction, not the beginning of the end. We didn't anticipate a recession. It's sort of playing out that way. The market has quickly corrected itself this year and has continued its march northward. In terms of the economic environment, growth still remains there, slowing down a bit, coming down from our sugar high of the tax cut last year. So growth in the first quarter was 3.1% roughly GDP. Second quarter just came out preliminary 2.1%. Declining but far from recession. When we look across at the economic statistics, we see a general slowdown, but not recessionary. A lot of the slowdown can be attributed to the uncertainty with the whole tariff. That is creating a lot of angst among corporate heads and their investments going forward. if there's uncertainty, they're generally going to pull back the purse strings and wait till they have some more certainty. And that's kind of what we're seeing a little bit here. That said, if you come down from the macro side of the world, the U.S. is still strong, globally slowing down, but getting a little better. In China as well, getting a little better there from last year. On the equity markets itself, we're in the process of the second quarter earnings season. So second quarter ends on June 30th, as our financials do as well. And then companies generally report their earnings, usually through the month of July. It's a good way for us to get an understanding of how the market is going. Last night, Apple reported, for example, and Apple communicated that China is a little better than they expected, generally positive upbeat tone to Apple. Across the board with earnings season, really better than feared. Everybody expected a recession, everybody expected a decline in earnings, a decline in business sentiment. We're not seeing that. Earnings are up 7% so far. So the companies that reported revenues are up 5% year over year. So we're still seeing growth. We're still seeing economic growth, and companies still reporting these numbers. So going forward, we still believe that this bull market still has a little bit more room to go. Valuations are getting a little stretched. Earnings are coming through, so earnings are coming up a little bit. Valuations are a little stretched. We always talk about on the S&P 15 times, 16 times forward. That's the comfortability range, the typical range where valuation is. Right now, about 16.4, so slightly above it. So valuations are a little high given where we are, but not crazy. Like I said, earnings are moving up a little bit. See a little revising of that. The big thing today is the FOMC, the Federal Open Markets Committee, the Fed. They're going to release their statement today around 2 o'clock, whether they're going to decrease short-term rates or keep the same. The general consensus, I believe, probably is 96% that they're going to decrease short-term rates by 25 basis points. They're calling it an insurance cut. So what we'll see is the short-term rates go down a little bit. It could affect our credit cards a little bit, take their rates down. It may affect our savings rates as well. But they're posing it as just an insurance cut, not that they're seeing a dramatic slowdown anywhere. Whether this is needed or not needed, but the market is expecting it, so hopefully they do that. If they do it, everything should be fine. The market will get some volatility in the next couple of days by that.
And again, 25 basis points is 0.0025.
It's not a big,
So it's a quarter of a percent.
Looking at our numbers as well, going back to our portfolio, overall a decent quarter. There's going to be some upward movement to the quarter-to-date numbers because we still haven't gotten in our private equity numbers. You can see the dashes down there, some Graco going down to Mesera. But overall, a decent quarter. There may be questions.
Yes, as I asked yesterday in the finance subcommittee, what is the market value as of yesterday? It was 5 something. What is it today?
Yep. So actually, as of 7/29, it was 504,637,405. So $504 million. That was the 29th. So yesterday the market was down a little bit. Today the market's up a little bit. So probably roughly, give or take a few. There's no further questions on the economy of the markets. We'll move on to the second piece. So the second piece we'll talk about is the Terra Cap subsequent quarter input calculation. So for this one, if you recall, when we signed up for Terra Cap, committed our money, we were one of the part of the final close. And as the document states, if you're part of the final close, you have to pay interest to the existing investors, right? So people who invested a few years ago, they took on a little bit more risk. Their properties appreciated. We're kind of jumping in on their appreciation, so we kind of go a little bit standard industry procedure to close them funds. So for this particular fund, it was 8% annualized. So we had to pay. We went back and we double checked that calculation. The calculation is simple interest, 8% non-compounding. So for example, if there was a close 1 year ago and it was a year until we put our money in, we're just charged 8% on that amount of the close. So if it closed at $100,000, they charged 8% on the $100,000 to our time. If it was a half a year ago, it would be 4%. So simple interest calculation. So we looked at the numbers, we're comfortable with that. Pause if anybody has any questions. Moving on. Last piece is the mid-cap post-trade analysis. So if you remember, We terminated 2 active managers and moved the money to the Piedmont Mid-Cap Index Fund. We hired Northern Trust, which is our custodial bank, to do the transition management. So essentially what they'll do is they'll take the existing portfolios, they'll take the target portfolio, and they'll make a trade. And they do this, and we utilize transition management a little bit more efficient than STG active management. So we share it with the market. So we have a letter summarizing the post-trade analysis and a onerous document provided by Northern Trust about the post-trade analysis. So essentially, just to boil it down to the final numbers. So if you look on the Northern Trust post-trade analysis, we have these dark blue rows down at the bottom. They're the summary of everything. So the second column in, that's the post-trade cost, that's the pre-trade cost. That was the estimate of the cost of the transition. So the estimated trading cost at $204,000, the estimated opportunity cost at $195,000. Opportunity cost is just, they're assuming a market move, whether they buy or sell, so they have to take in some estimate of what they believe the market will do based on their actions of buying and selling. So the total cost, where they define a shortfall, as $400,000. That was their pre-trade estimate. Moving over to the left, the actual cost, if you look at the actual cost, the bottom row in the dark blue came in at $110,000. So it was below what they anticipated. The trading costs were a little bit higher than they expected because they had to trade in the open market a little more than they anticipated. But the opportunity cost was actually much lower. Negative $118,000 means that they actually benefited the plan by their trading for in the tune of $118,000. So essentially what happened is when they did this transition, they did it at roughly about 2:30 in the afternoon, 2:30 in the afternoon on June 6th. And what happened with the market on that particular point in time is it started selling off a little bit. And so what happened is they sold on the way down, which hurt them a little bit, but they bought on the way down, which helped them a lot. So as they were buying on the way down, they were picking up the stocks a lot cheaper. And so that translated to this negative $100,000 number, which is actually a good thing. So overall, the transition went smoothly, a little better than expected. And now most of the assets, all the assets have transitioned over to Piedmont, and it's an investment one. Right. That's what I have for the consultant stuff. So in here, yes. So if you look down, it would be 1, 2, 3, 4th black dark line, or 4th black font. So we have total portfolio, Addicts Emerging Markets, Sawgrass, Addicts Michigan, then Piedmont Mid-Cap Index. So you can see it has now $88 million in it. We have some residual cash with the Victory and Systematic, 2 mid-cap managers that are going out. We'll sweep that out this quarter and they'll disappear from the record. So it is reflected in this.
So as a reminder, what we did was we liquidated 2 active manager portfolios and then moved them into an index fund. So you're talking about roughly $160 million being moved around because you're selling both portfolios that are roughly $40 million and then buying a new one that's roughly $80 million. So considering how much money was being moved around, the expense was actually very modest.
Thank you. Moving right along to the report. Do you have any other committee?
The Personnel Committee and the Finance Committee are both recommending that the board will approve the request for a supplemental actuarial analysis related to the $400 that's under new business. Both committees are recommending for approval to forward to the City Council the proposed ordinance regarding the definition of actuarial equivalence. The Personnel Committee received and revised a draft of an EDRA policy, which they will hopefully approve in July and August, and that will be coming to the board. Both committees are prepared to recommend that the appointment of the medical director, which is under unfinished business, item A be approved by the board today. And both committees review the annual disability procedures report. The personnel committee has requested that we do follow up with the finance director of NOMC. We still have the member outstanding who we have not been able to get records for. She did come by and bring one of the requested alternative methods, which is a social security statement, but it doesn't show the employer. So we're continuing to work with her to try to get transcripts, and personnel did direct us to contact the hospital again. And, go ahead. I was just going to say that was it for the personnel committee.
Okay. Any trustee? Did you have anything?
There was a finance.
Yeah,
I
go
think we
ahead.
have one. They reviewed the addicts portfolio restructuring and the new fee schedule. We also received new investment guidelines and a new appendix B, which is obviously their increased fees. We need to have the attorney review both documents, and so that's still under review. They reviewed all the correspondence in your agenda. They are recommending the new business item that Trustee Swayzer would be appointed the canvasser for the upcoming election, as well as changing the time that we begin to tally the vote.
And what day was that?
The tally will occur on August 26th, and we will begin at 8:30 a.m. instead of 9:30. But it is a resolution in the agenda. And that's all I have for the finance.
Okay. Anything from the trustees?
I have one thing, I am a chairman of the personnel and benefits subcommittee. There were two of this time of the year where we're evaluating employees. The two employees, Philip and Christy, have been evaluated by this month. And I'd like to ask if there's any volunteers among the trustees to evaluate the executive director. Because that would be heading forward next month.
Sure, I'll volunteer. Do you have a date in mind?
No, I don't. I have to get with Trevor Moore.
Yeah, I'll be on that also.
Okay, we'll get together and coordinate that.
All righty.
Thank
With the concerning evaluation with Philip and Christie. So Deborah, you was the only one that said in on that. Was anyone from personnel?
No, it was just the one-on-ones.
Okay. And the only reason why I'm bringing that up is just to allow them a voice as well. And I think sometimes what happens when you interacting with your immediate supervisor, and I think they should also have opportunities if they have any concerns, that we should set up some type of platform where they could come to the board or to the personnel committee without their supervisor being there. The only reason why I say that because sometimes you have issues, and I'm not saying you're afraid, but you don't know how to articulate that in front of your supervisor, feeling that it might jeopardize your raise or some type of disciplinary action. So I want to make sure that we put something in place where they have opportunity to come to the personnel board and voice any concerns that they might have without their immediate supervisor being present.
Well, I also think that we should do it with the full board, because the full board ultimately will decide whether they can change in pay or benefits. And I think they should be able to do that without the executive director present. So you need to tell us whether there has to be a closed session. Yes, or that they have to request a closed
They have to
session.
request to go into closed session. That's correct. But they can make that request for an evaluation.
Well, regardless of if they request it or not, I think that needs to be done. Because you're sitting and your boss is sitting there, yeah, they might have it, but they work for this board. They don't just work for the executive director, they work for this board. So there needs to be an opportunity for us to be able to sit down and talk with them.
You know, I have a different opinion on that, though. You know, and I think that clearly it's our responsibility to evaluate the executive director. But I believe that if we give somebody the responsibility, that they should also have the authority of although the board, the employees work for us, I believe that our input should be given to the executive director, and the executive director should have the authority to evaluate her staff. Her findings, of course, should be presented to the board. And if there is a controversy, or that controversy, that the employee should have the right to come to the board if there is an issue. But you know, I think that we need to stay in, we really need to stay in our lane on this. And I just think that that's my feelings on that. I don't see that we should have that we should be involved in evaluating our staff. If we have a problem with the staff, then we should then bring that information to the executive director, and the executive director should then deal with that. But for us to have to feel that we got to evaluate our staff, I think that really that's not our responsibility.
No,
Maybe I don't really think that perhaps there should be
Opportunity for them to be able to talk to us.
Pardon me?
I said they should have an opportunity to be able to talk to us. We're not saying that we're evaluating them, but they should have an opportunity to be able to talk to us.
Oh, I agree with that. That should be all at all times. But I'm talking in terms of the evaluation itself, though. I think that should be. We're not there with the executive director on a daily basis. She has the responsibility, or if it was another director, it would be a he, but in this case, it's a she. She has the direct responsibility to direct our staff, and she has the most information about our individual staff members. And that's why I believe it should be her authority to do the actual evaluation. I concur with you, Patrice, that if there is a discrepancy, or that all of our employees should have the ability to come to the board members. But in terms of us having to sit in on the evaluations, I don't agree that should be that should occur. I think that we give off the wrong information if we then, because I think it might inhibit the executive director from having conversations with her staff that she should be having if we are sitting there as kind of like the authorities. But I think that that's a discussion that perhaps we should have, amongst the trustees, so that we can be on the same page. I don't know that this is necessarily the forum that we need to make that decision.
The way I presented it, if it came across that our intention is not to evaluate them, is to create a platform where they would have an opportunity, if they have any concern, that they can address to the board without their immediate supervisor being present. We're not trying to evaluate them at all, because we do not work with them from day to day. We just want to make sure that a platform is in place, so if they have any issues or concern, they can bring it in confident to the board without their immediate supervisor being present. We weren't trying to evaluate them at all. And I don't know if they was aware or if there's something in place that for them to do that. You know, we want to make sure that they feel secure and expressing themselves with any issues they might have. Not necessarily with Deborah, but just issues in general that they don't want to bring or share in front of their immediate supervisor. That's all I was saying.
What if
As on my evaluation, I apologize. I'm not trying to evaluate them because I don't work with them on day-to-day operations. I just want to make sure that a platform is in place, so if they have any concerns that they want to address with the board, they can do it in confidence without their immediate supervisor.
Can I just respond quickly? Because I think I can save you guys. Whether you want to evaluate or how you want to proceed, that I obviously don't feel strongly one way or the other. I tell them on a regular basis, if you have any issues, you can always go to the board or any one of the trustees. You know, I talk to Philip all the time. If you have any inkling or you feel like I'm doing something wrong or the procedures that we're using is not right, or, you know, you suspect something about me, you have an obligation to go to the board. So I do, they know they can come to the board or any one of the trustees with any issues that they have. We have those conversations more than once.
And that's good.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. All I'm saying is that I think it, from my perspective, I think it carries a little bit more weight when it comes from the board than from the immediate supervisor. You know, I'm not trying to say that that avenue, they're not aware of that avenue, but I just want to make sure that it's on record that there will be a platform in place so if they have some issues or concerns, we are here to help them. That's all. And go ahead, Bill.
My concern is we're gonna be talking about money at the end. Somebody's gonna be wanting some money. And I'm gonna tell you, if it was me and I wasn't on the personnel subcommittee, I'd be wanting to see what that person's, because they might want benefits instead of money. You know, it's nice to say, you know, hey, I want 5%, but what about if you got an increase in benefits? You need to decide what you want and then talk to the board, but the full board is gonna wanna know how much you want and why. And if you want to change the benefits, what do you want? And how do you want that, how do you see that going about? But, you know, I'm not looking to evaluate person, but when you start talking money, I want to know some answers.
You know, what we might want to consider, if I might, is to actually develop a policy. We are a policy-making board. And if we could then, and I think that we in the past, we actually had documentation as it relates to how we would evaluate our executive director, how the staff will be evaluated, and even further than that, how we evaluate the board, because we need to evaluate ourselves. There are things that, of course, that go on a daily and monthly basis with all the individuals and groups that I just delineated. And so therefore, I think that it's up to us as a policy-making board to put together a policy in how we would evaluate the entire board. And that, in my opinion, should be perhaps looked at in the personnel committee. That's where it started at before. And I think that we actually have language already put together. And maybe we need to put that, you know, pull that out and see if that then will cover all of our concerns. And if it doesn't cover all of our concerns, then we can then make whatever adjustments or improvements to that will cover all of our concerns.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah, do you have that language, Deborah, that you could provide?
If I understand you correctly, it sounds like something that was done through committee in 2013, but I would certainly have to report Mr. Moore. I will have something for the committee at their next meeting.
Yeah, we actually had language and we started to working on that language to not only to evaluate you as the executive director, but also a procedure that would be used to evaluate the staff, and also for us as board members to evaluate ourselves as board members too.
I believe you're right, Mr. Moore. I will repeat that.
And if that could be provided to the trustees so that everyone will have an opportunity to look at it. So maybe the concerns that we're discussing today, I believe that much of that will already be in the language that we had.
Any additional conversation on this? If not, any other trustees have anything they want to share? I just want to share with you guys in regards to the personal finance curriculum that has been took place at the ITA. It's going to be an ongoing curriculum. They're going to do it again. The money managers will do it again next year. And it's going to be a regular part of the curriculum of the school. So North Point had spearheaded that, and they're looking forward to doing it again. They also is putting together a video just drumming up additional support for that, because it's all deal with sweat equity, you know, where the money managers are coming in and sharing their knowledge with the students. One thing they have, you know, Steve participated this past fall, ADEX also, that's came in and participated. So it's going to be an ongoing curriculum for the 10th graders. It went so well that Detroit won part of it now. So they're going to try to do it. As long as they stay in Pontiac, I'm okay with them. So they're going to do Detroit as well. They're going to do 3 of the schools in the city of Detroit. But we are going to keep it going here in the city of Pontiac every fall. Every winter semester. The money managers come in and share information about the industry with the kids. So I'm excited about it, that it's going on. And at the end, and I think this year we're going to try to get them to really understand about their own personal finance as far as banking and setting up a savings account. From my understanding, some of the money managers are going to even volunteer or find some type of resource to help these young people start their bank account with at least $10. So if they have got some extra money around somewhere, I just want to put that out there. Not meaning to put you guys on the spot. And also next year, with the career day, I know Cynthia did it this past April. That's going to go on again next year at the Pontiac High. So we're going to try to solicit other money managers to come in, and I'll check with Steve and David and see how their schedule is, where they can come out and just share about the industry with the young people.
It's a lot of fun with the kids, yeah.
No, thank you. And Cynthia, know that you have to bring some type of.
You gotta get something to get them to your table.
Right, bring them to your table, you know. But the kids enjoy it. It takes place every year in May.
And it helps that Patrice is next to you.
Okay. And just in advance, I want to thank everybody who has participated in the past, and I look forward to your support coming next school year. Thank you.
Definitely.
Thank you, Trustee. For spearhead. And the city of Pontiac and the school district is the better for what you get.
Chair Moore, you have anything?
Well, you know, I just like to add my voice to thanking you for the leadership you provided in dealing with these 2 projects, man. And you know, that's going like over and above, and it demonstrates your commitment to not only the city, but also to the kids. I hate to say kids, the young folks in our community, because that's what it's all about. You know, very shortly we'll be all passing this baton on, and we want to make sure that they are prepared and aware of the financial opportunities that might be put out here for them. So once again, I thank you for your leadership there.
Thank you, Chairman Moore. Moving right along. executive director report.
In the consent agenda, there's a member who died in February. The reason she's on there is this is a correction. She was reported in February as being deceased with a beneficiary. The beneficiary predeceased, so that's why she's on the The summary annual reports and the annual option 2 notice to active members was mailed on July 18th. The summary annual report was filed with the state on July 18th. The annual fee and political contribution disclosure notices were sent to service providers on July 23rd. Retiree dated days was re-examined on July 8th. And we received notice this morning that we should have the medical reports by the end of the week. Rodney Carr did attend his re-examination last Friday. However, he wasn't feeling well and he left about half an hour in. So we will need to reschedule him. We received all 4 releases from our disability members in order to request their transcript from the IRS. So all of the disability procedures are moving along. With respect to asset transition, we did fully fund the Terra capital call on July 3rd. The North Point agreement, as you all are aware, we are graduating North Point from the addicts portfolio. Legal has reviewed the agreement and the management fee exhibit, and we're ready to put that forth for approval. I'm sorry, the Finance Committee is recommending that for approval. With Sizer, we are still reviewing that collective investment trust. That is the other manager that was to be graduated from the Manager of Managers program, but we are still reviewing the investment documents. We sent follow-up questions to the manager. When I say we, myself and the attorney, sent questions to the manager on Tuesday, and we expect to have a full report for the board next month.
Deborah, can I add one thing to that? And I just want to remind the board that with respect to Sizer, the assets are still being managed by Sizer under the addicts program. So there's like no delay or any issue. Okay,
There's
I just
no
want
rush. Just make sure we get it right.
And that's all I have, Mr. Vice Chair. Thank you.
So with that, as those individuals, they have, you guys might talk about this, as those individuals graduate, you might want to share with us of the new ones that are coming into the ADX portfolio. I don't think we talked about that at all.
No.
Well, under the restructuring, we did. So
but not
Yes,
with
that's
the board as a whole.
So ADX, if you recall, it's our emerging manager program, and that is manager program. So they have discretion on the underlying managers who they hire and fire and terminate. So we move them from a large cap allocation to an all cap allocation. So in the process of moving it from just large cap stock, big US stock, to mid and small cap as well, all cap, they terminated TiVo, which was one of our large cap managers. They had some performance struggles, so they terminated them. They hired 2 new managers. They hired Lasante, which is a mid cap manager out of New York. Lasante has been around since 2003. It's woman-owned, very growth-oriented. Their return stream is a little bit more volatile than some of our other managers, but they're more thematic investors. So they'll invest in a theme, and they'll go in and pull in on a theme. A lot of times, thematic investing, it works until it doesn't. That's essentially the market, right? It works until it doesn't. So we always talk about, escalator up, elevator down. That's a typical market for, equities. And themes do a similar approach. They'll work for a while, then they'll stop. The banks, that was a thematic, that was a theme. It worked great until it didn't. So their return stream will be a little bit volatile in the short term. Longer term, they're good numbers. The short term, it's a little bit tougher. So we just have to withstand that volatility. The other manager they added was Focus Financial Corporation. It's a small cap manager. They're out of California. They're a little bit more consistent in their return stream. This is Asian minority owned. So those are the 2 managers that are now going into the portfolio, and they'll migrate from a large cap to a small.
And then also, the other 3 is still in
The other three still in there. So Edgar Lomax, if you recall, they were recently hired. They replaced Piedmont on the active side. We just hired Piedmont on the passive side, so different strategies. Oakbrook, which is Russell 1000 growth, very good numbers, very consistent, and McLaren. So they all remain in the portfolio. Their allocations will adjust a little bit, but not too much.
So like we've discussed in the past, we did expect some changes to happen because they're going down in market capitalization. They're buying smaller stocks. The older portfolio is just large stocks. So the three large managers are still there. One was terminated, and they're going to hire two managers so that the entire portfolio now looks more like the Russell 3000, which is their new bogey or benchmark. Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure the board was aware of that as a whole. Was there anything else, Deborah, from you?
No, unless
Okay.
anyone had any questions.
All right, let's move on to new business. Unfinished.
You've been right.
Just mention correspondence from Gianmarco or no? No, but I can talk about it.
I'm sorry, we just pointed out that you all had received by email the correspondence from Gianmarco. It was just suggesting to the attorney that she would consider her opinion regarding the finance director. Obviously, we discussed it with the attorney, Mr. Moore. Her opinion hasn't changed, and this really is just in your agenda for information purposes. But if anyone had any questions.
I'd be happy, but yeah, that's essentially it in a nutshell. Okay.
All right, unfinished business.
So the medical director is one of the advisors that the ordinance vests this board with the responsibility for appointing. The system has a policy that annually we will select one of our major service providers for review. We selected the medical director this year for review. The prior executive assistant and the current one both experienced the same problems with the current medical director, MES, and it was just a lot of service issues. There's a lot of back and forth. There was never the same person. They weren't very responsive. It took a lot of effort on our part to make sure a member was re-examined. So we did look at 3 firms that provide this service in the state of Michigan and around the country. That's detailed in the report from Christie that is in your agenda. We looked at ExamWorks, MedSource, and MMRO. ExamWorks, they were responsive, but they weren't as responsive as MMRO. MedSource never ever did respond. We were just requesting information. I believe that's the one that actually tried to schedule an appointment for our member, and we were just asking for information about their services. So at the end of the day, MMRO was very responsive. They responded in hours. If you read their report, their proposal for medical services, you can see they have experience. They obviously were the ones who were best familiar with the role of a medical director working with public pension plans. And so staff is recommending that you would appoint the doctor, I'm sorry, I forget his name.
Jeffrey Deitch.
Jeffrey Deitch as the medical director. And keep in mind that the ordinance requires that you appoint a physician as medical director. He's like their executive doctor. He's kind of over the whole practice. He will not be performing the independent medical evaluation. It's going to depend on the member's disability. Obviously, we have one who's a psych disability retiree, so he would need a psychological examination. Others have back problems. They would be referred to the doctor, the specialty doctor, as necessary. So we're appointing this person to essentially serve as the coordinator. It requires that we appoint a physician as medical director, but he won't be performing the examinations. He would be coordinating with the specialist. Does anyone have any questions about it?
Mr. Chair, I think this was brought up in our finance subcommittee yesterday, and I did ask about the fee schedule, which is a part of all this correspondence that was given to us today. But the one thing I think we did state is that we would have analysis of what we had before and what we're getting ready to go into summation. So I think until we receive that, I don't see us really moving forward. I mean, unless the board is okay with moving forward. That was a recommendation that was asked yesterday.
Do you have that information?
We do not. I did not have time last night.
Okay.
So I'm happy to table it.
Yeah, let's table that so we can at least know based on what we was paying compared to what we. I'm sorry. Yes.
Oh.
I would move that we table it.
All in favor? Billy support. All in favor?
Aye.
So, we can anticipate that.
I should be able to have that. Well, I need the money.
We can just email it out to everyone. Now, we go to new business. New business.
Under the new business item, there's a one-page letter at the party requesting an appeal. If the board would like to discuss it, I would request that we go into closed session.
Wait, can we do the legal report and put that at the end and go into closed session?
Right, yeah. So let's go to item B. We'll move item B.
Sure, absolutely. So I will leave item B to the attorney and the consultant. This is the Invesco Real Estate Amendment number 2.
That's great. So this is something that we discussed in Finance Committee, but just to bring everyone on board up to speed on this. Invesco, as you all know, is one of our real estate managers, and they most recently had an amendment to their documentation. This is an open-end core product, which is the first step of investing in real estate. And you may recall we have had 2 investments with them, initially in 2017, then in 2018, for the sum total of about $15.5 million, which has since grown to over $16 million. So what this amendment is they're changing some of the pieces to the original documents that we signed. The net result of this is that there's some slight positives, slight negatives. It doesn't really affect us because the biggest change that we got from it was there are price points, meaning that the more money you give them, the fee goes down. With the amount of money that we've already contributed to them, we're beyond that first price point anyway. So there are some investors that maybe gave them a little bit less money, they're going to get a little bit of a discount. But for us, there is no difference in fees. Did everyone get the actual memorandum itself? I don't know how much detail to go through. I'm happy to address any one of them, but I didn't want to go into too much minutia that might be confusing. What I'll say is that we at Pontiac represent one investor. There are over 130 investors in this fund. Our investment size is roughly $16 million. The fund size on a net basis is $10 billion. On a leverage basis is over $14 billion. If we don't consent to this, that's assumed as it going through and is a consent. We actually have to actively say we don't agree to it. And as I highlighted, we are a modest amount of money relative to the entire sum. So the likelihood that this amendment goes through is very high, regardless of our action. This notification purpose, they are checking all the boxes. It doesn't affect us tremendously, but you all should be aware that you had that official documentation.
And if I could add a couple of words as well. I also looked at this, this amendment, and from what I can see, the changes are positive because they are looking, they eliminated the initial tier. So if your investment was 15 million or less, you paid 1.10% in fees. They eliminated it and they said everyone up to 25 million, you're only paying 1%. It sounds like from what you just said, it doesn't affect us. But even if it did, it would have affected us in a good way. And then the other thing that they mentioned, they clarify that they base the fees on the NAV. So you have the ability to grow into the lower fee tier. As your investment grows, they're not looking back at what your initial deposit was. You're charged on what it has grown into with a reduced fee schedule. And I would also want to just remind the board that I did provide a summary of this investment, and we talked about the fact that the investors are entitled to a 90-day advance written notice of any changes to the schedule of the fees. But you also have the ability to get out of this. It's really no different than a separately managed account. If they want to change the fees, they can change the fees, but you can get out of the program. So here, we did know about it going into that they could change the fees, but we do have the ability. There was an initial lockup period of like 12 months or so, but after that, on a quarterly basis, there's liquidity. So I don't, from a legal perspective, see an issue with this. And I think the consultants were talking from a practical standpoint. If you were to reject it, it probably won't have any impact on the fund as a whole.
I think the bottom line is that we're looking at how much money we can make, and people are, if they're making us money, that little fee is not that relevant to me, as long as they're making us the kind of profits that we need to make our system profitable. So I think that I'd like to move this amendment and
Support it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Moving right along, C, resolution to reschedule annual meeting.
This resolution is to reschedule the annual meeting prior. Last month we scheduled it for October 29th. We could not get St. Joseph Auditorium on that day, and there was little desire for many parties to do it on Halloween. So we are requesting that we schedule that to Thursday, October 24th.
What day is the IFBB in San Diego?
I do not know. I'm sorry, is it in the
It's in
consent agenda?
It's in October.
It's in October 21st.
Right, through the 21st.
Oh,
That's the three.
when is it? When is those dates?
Oh, I'm sorry, I don't know when these these are kind of offshoots that run concurrently with the IFBB. I don't know when the actual.
Well, we can sign that before we absolutely nothing when Mr. Chairman spoke yesterday. We had talked about confirming you all about what would be a best date for this, so you will only have to come in here one time.
20th to the 23rd.
The 23rd.
You're welcome. Yes.
Let me get back.
24th. We'll be back on 24th. That's the day we fly back.
Come in here.
So we
We're,
might-
that's the day we fly back.
We can,
Let's find out who all going first,
okay,
and then we can go from there.
here's the trouble that we have, is St. Joseph books up very quickly.
That's why.
And so that's where,
Right. So right now, this is the date that's on the book.
we've booked it.
Right, but I'm just saying if if you don't have a lot of people that's going, so let's find out who's going to San Diego. Yeah.
Is anyone-
Right now, I don't know.
Well, I'm going.
Okay.
Okay.
So,
I
I mean, Billy is going. As of now, Billy is the only someone that's certain.
What's the date on that, San Diego?
It's,
The 20th through the 23rd? The 20th through the 23rd.
Alrighty.
of October. Okay, so then since we already currently have that date secure, then we'll just find out who else is going. But we was just saying how quickly they book up over there. So right now, let's keep this date on the book. You follow me?
I do.
Right.
I guess the only party's not here, there's only 2 parties marked.
Well, we just asked them, you would know.
No one has registered for IABP. You send us your list, and so we go ahead and, make your arrangements, but no one has come to us and said, hey, I'd like to attend.
They got like 30 days before.
I know I won't be making.
Should we take it for that?
That did what?
Well, let's just table that for now. Yeah, let's move on. Yeah, go ahead.
We, in finance, we also discussed the potential for changing the finance as well as the regular meeting. You just want to table all of that? Because obviously we want to coordinate with.
Yeah, because we're trying to coordinate with they have, so they don't have to.
Well, the 31st, the meetings will be done by early morning, late afternoon, so that works.
But they changed in Halloween anyway, so you should.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, they talking about it, they haven't been official yet.
Changing Halloween.
It's gonna be in June.
What? It's gonna be in June. Yeah, the last Saturday of the month is a petition.
Oh, I don't know. That's gonna conflict with baseball and softball and.
You know, Halloween might fall in the.
Yeah,
They want to make it official on the last Saturday.
Then- That's it. We should book it in.
So we're tabling this,
Yeah, we take.
the annual meeting?
The annual
Okay.
meeting for now. But we're gonna try to coordinate with they have in regards, so, with the finance committee, so they
Got
don't have to do back and forth, so.
I'm sorry, Mr. Vice Chair, would you repeat that?
We tabled,
Yeah.
the annual meeting, but we're gonna try to coordinate with they have, so we can kind of be in coordinates with them, not having to come back for the annual meeting finance. So we're gonna try to make sure we secure those dates. Does any of that make sense at all?
No, I didn't
What
hear
just
the
said? Chrissy looking at me like.
It does.
Okay.
I'm just, there's a lot with the auditorium and ordering and printing and Allegra and save the date. So it's, I wouldn't recommend waiting another couple weeks or a month to make a decision.
We're
Okay.
looking like a couple of days.
Okay.
Something like that.
Yeah.
And we'll be able to confirm exactly who all's going to San Diego, hopefully.
Have we resolved?
Billy, right now, Billy is the only one. All right.
Hey,
Have
look,
we-
while you doing that, why don't you put the monthly meeting, if you're gonna coordinate the finance, we might want to coordinate the monthly meeting at that same time.
That's what we're talking about in the finance meeting. We were saying the finance and the regular meeting could be together instead of, because they usually come Tuesday for our finance subcommittee, and then the meeting is today. So we can put it all at one time, so they don't have to.
Right.
It's a bit strict. Yeah, let's table that and we'll come up with it appropriately. Moving right along, D,
Vice Chair, someone gonna move to table that?
I move.
What? Move up the trees supported by Billy.
Thank you.
I don't need to do it.
The trees down every day. We're tired, something.
Are they for moving and supporting? They must get $1 every day.
We gotta move this on
All right, D.
Okay.
Oh, all in favor?
Aye.
Yeah.
fast.
As mentioned, this is a resolution to appoint trustee Billy Swayzer to serve as the trustee canvasser for the member trustee election being held Monday, August 26th, and to schedule the time to begin tallying the votes at 8:30 a.m. instead of the normal.
Before.
All Britain and white.
All right.
Vote.
All in favor?
Aye.
E.
This is a resolution to forward to the city council the update to the definition of actuarial equivalence. Actuarial equivalence is defined in the ordinance, and until 2014, it only said that the present value of the optional forms of payment must be equal, meaning whatever a member would receive in pay. The present value, what a member would receive under the regular option, must equal what that member will receive in payment, the present value of those payments under options 1 through 5. In 2014, when the IRS gave us our favorable determination letter, they said it was contingent upon us adopting certain resolutions. The resolution related to actuarial equivalence required us to put into the ordinance what mortality tables we're using and what interest rate we're using. That amendment was adopted by the council in 2014, and now that definition is in the ordinance as of April of this year. In 2017, you all changed your interest rate and your mortality tables based on a recommendation from the actuary. In addition, you said we're also going to use those same assumptions for actuarial equivalence. The board, the ordinance gives this board the authority to make those determinations as far as actuarial rates, and so you properly adopted new rates. It just was not updated in the ordinance. So if you go to the actual proposed amendment, what we're recommending is that the council will adopt to change the 6.5% rate to 7%, and to replace the 1971 fixed annuity mortality table with the RP 2014 healthy annuitant mortality table. Does anyone have any questions?
I'll support.
No, getting in on it.
All in favor?
Aye. Oh, Mr. Chair, the only thing I would suggest that when this is sent to city council for approval, that we would have Deborah come and present, so they'll know exactly what we're approving. That would be no problem.
I'd be happy.
Okay. Moving right along. Well, all in favor for, you mean for Deborah to, for the resolution? All right, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All right. Do we need to vote for Deborah to attend as well?
No.
I don't think we need.
Just director.
All right. Okay. Yeah.
Okay, so the request for the supplemental actuarial analysis, this is just the annual request that goes to the actuary to have.
I would move it.
Support.
Mayor sign this. We should have a picture from the mayor. You know, the person that requested it is not actually approved by the council. And they're not a city official, so we need to have the mayor sign it.
Could be very bad.
You mean for,
Oh, my God. She's gonna take away it anyway, so she might as well sign it. It shouldn't take her that long. Sign a piece of paper.
Okay, but I don't want to hold up people getting money.
yeah, so all in favor?
Aye.
Those are-
Wait,
John Bell has
Just
a
a question. So this is the $400, so we're approving the actuarial study, but then it still has to go back to council again, does it not? So, okay.
Yeah, that was study done.
Yes, okay. Just wanted to double check that it goes to council again.
Yeah, we have that. We have that.
What's the timing on that? Do you recall?
August, it usually comes in August.
Yeah. There we
So
go.
the current one runs out August.
Okay. So this is somewhat time sensitive, is it not?
Yeah, wait.
Well, you know, only take $20,000 last night. It's good. You could say 20,000, so. Hey, she's around.
Moving right along.
Yes.
Yeah, we already did. All right, we need to go in.
Okay, so are we at legal?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so on the agenda, I just want to note the TerraCap Partners Fourth Amendment. I'm reviewing that, and I'll prepare a written report that'll go to the Finance Committee and then make its way to the board. North Point is in my legal report. Which everyone should have received a copy of that. So North Point, at the last meeting, I provided a red line copy of that agreement with all of my requested changes. I reviewed that with the board. North Point has agreed to all of those changes, and as a result, the agreement is in a legally acceptable format for adoption by the board. Having said that, there's one point that I want to bring up that was raised by the executive director, and that is, give me just one moment. In the agreement itself, it states, and I'll read this provision, section 3B, North Point may, in certain instances, authorize the payment of specified increased brokerage commissions in return for certain research services from the broker. However, North Point will do so only if it determines that the amount of the commissions allocated to such broker is reasonable in relation to the value of brokerage and research services received within the meaning of Section 28E of the Securities Exchange Act of 1934, and the research services received provide lawful and appropriate assistance to North Point in the performance of its investment decision-making responsibilities. Research services furnished by brokers to North Point may be used by North Point in connection with the provision of investment management services to all or just some clients. So basically what they can do is they can, and correct me if I'm wrong, but they can direct sales in order to receive research to help them with their investment making responsibilities. That is perfectly acceptable under their fiduciary responsibility and under federal law. So Deborah just mentioned we should bring this to the board's attention that essentially you're using soft dollars to pay for this research. I reached out to the manager and they said, you know what, if the board doesn't want to do that, we can carve them out. So we can do our block trade, carve out the Pontiac retirement system, do our block trade, and then trade Pontiac shares separately. The only thing that we don't know is if you're getting the best price because you're being taken out of that block. So it's up to the board. There's no legal issue with it being in there. And it's my understanding that you have a better likelihood of getting a better trade on that, but maybe I'll leave that to the consultants to opine on. If you want it out, they've agreed they'll take it out. If you want to leave it in, it can stay in. I have no legal issue with it.
And I wanted to bring it to the board's attention just because in all of your separately managed accounts, historically, you've never had this language in your agreements. So all of your managers use soft dollars. No one has ever put it in their agreement until now. That's why I wanted to put it on the table. But again, they're soft dollars. All of your separately managed account managers use them, but you're effectively you're signing off on it this time. And I just wanted to make you aware of it.
So they're not doing anything different
Not
than the
at all.
other managements, it's just memorialized.
Exactly. Yes.
So it shouldn't
And
be-
it's perfectly permissible, right?
I would move that.
Did you guys have anything to add to that?
You talk now.
Like walking down the hall. So what I'll say is that technically what a block trade is that if they want to sell all the shares of ABC in the portfolios that they have to their clients, bless you, they'll do it in one blow if they can, because hopefully they'll get a better price. Mm-hmm. What we're saying is that we don't want to be potentially in that block and then potentially we get sold out differently. Who's to say the price that they sell this block is different from the one we get? It all depends on what happens in the market. There's no guarantee that the block trade actually is going to get you better pricing. It's just that that's how they usually do it. That's it. With trading, especially with how things move so quickly with computers nowadays, best execution could potentially be a fraction of a penny. So there's not going to be a dramatic change, I would suspect, with what we're going to get, whether it's on the buy or the sell. Frankly, it would be very difficult to be able to pin them on saying, well, we don't think you got best execution, because best execution is pretty wide in how it's executed. So it's really a non-issue from our perspective, but it's something that you should be aware of because it was a little different.
So
So again, I would reiterate that the contract is in a legally acceptable format, and then we can note that this was discussed if the board is comfortable with that.
I'm good if you're good.
Is there a recommendation from anyone?
I'll move it.
I recommended in my legal report, I've stated that it's in a legally acceptable format for adoption by the retirement board.
I'll support that. Who support? I support it.
Okay. And you by getting.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, so at the last meeting, I had reported that retiree Bao we'd received multiple income withholding orders, and the amount that was to be withheld exceeded legally allowable amounts. So under state law, the retirement system is just required to send 50% to the Michigan State Disbursement Unit, and they will decide how to allocate the money among the different withholding orders. Well, the amount that is sent, it's based on disposable earnings, so it's 50% of his disposable earnings. Subsequent to the last meeting, he revised his exemptions. He increased them, which is going to provide actually a greater amount of disposable earnings and a greater amount that will go to the state. So the executive director had just asked if it was allowable for him to change his exemptions, and it is. It is. However, having said that, if he has too much withheld, the IRS could come back to him and say, they're not going to allow you to withhold this much or to claim this many exemptions. But he's perfectly within his legal right to change and to claim the number of exemptions that he's claiming, as long as he's not having too much withheld. But that's an IRS issue, not a board issue. So that was my email to the executive director. Items 3 and 4, Exhibit C and D, are just your portfolio monitoring reports, your monthly report from Robin Skeller, and your quarterly report from Motley Rice. Those just show the cases that have been filed and the potential losses that the system incurred during the class period. And those losses, hopefully you'll be able to recoup a portion of that as those cases settle. And we file our proof of claims to share in those settlements. Item number 5 was an interesting article. I attached this under Exhibit E. It was authored by a gentleman who's the president and CEO of Merit Research Services and co-owner of Minuet, LLC. And it was on the legal report. So it's titled, "The Top 21% of Cities with High Pension Funding Levels Deserve Attention and Usually Praise." It's a very brief article. I'd like to read it so we can have it in the record. With so much well-deserved negative attention focused on cities with huge unfunded pension overhangs, it's probably a good time to draw attention to the cities that are not burdened by pension liabilities. Cities which maintain adequate pension set-aside contributions based on reasonable actuarial assumptions usually fit the bill of practicing responsible management and earn a pat on the back. I would go on to say, or to state, they've listed the top 25 in the country, and Pontiac is number 3. Number 3. And they pull out, they make a few comments here about Pontiac. Pontiac may be a surprise city on the best funded list because it has been subject in recent years to the state of Michigan Treasury Office's Financial Emergency Supervision Program. It also states that, there was one other I thought where they mentioned the reasonableness of our assumptions. Specifically, they have the discount rate for Pontiac. They show it at 7.24%. And I think in talking to the executive director that may be a weighted average because we reduced our assumed rate of return from 7.5.
It's a derived weighted average, so this is, they put their little spin on it too, but
Okay.
absolutely, yes.
Right. So, I mean, that's, as you know, your assumed rate of return, that's what we have the actuary assumes we're going to earn 7%. And this is a testament to the reasonableness of this. And the fact that the top 25 are all within the 7, right around between 7 and 7.5%. See, it even talks about, although full pension funding is ideal, some caution is always advisable if the funding ratio is artificially propped up by mistaken actuarial assumptions. So, and that I think would be a situation if your assumed rate of return was really high, like, oh, we think we can get 12% every year for the next 20 years. That's not reasonable. And what this board has consistently done is look back historically to see if you're in fact meeting that assumed rate of return. And that's what your consultants do. And your actuary, when they make the recommendations to the board to adopt your assumptions, which I would remind you, under state law, that is your responsibility to adopt those assumptions that are used in the actuarial evaluation. So I thought that would be an interesting article to share with the board.
Another interesting thing is that all these top 25, there's only 3, the top 3 are above the 130% target that's in the settlement agreement that the city has.
Oh, that's an interesting point. So we'd still be right up there. In fact, we'd be number 1 if they had our current, because we're 170. Well, I shouldn't say that because I don't know how the other ones have been impacted recently. So just based on this chart.
Regardless, it's obviously a testament to how well the fund has done over time.
When you just look at the state of Michigan as a whole, you got 3 at the top.
Missouri's got 8.
Okay. That's a good for us.
And then item 6, there's been no changes in the fees. With that, I do have 2 items for closed session, and then Deborah has 1 item.